Regis McKenna, one of Apple's very first marketing consultants, way back when, 70s, 1976, 78. He came up with that line, right? All great marketing takes its cues from great religion.
Welcome to Your Intended Message, the perfect place for leaders and promising professionals who want to convey the intended message for greater success. Every week, we interview experts who address the challenges and best practices to deliver your message effectively. That might be one-to-one, one-to-few, or one-to-many. And perhaps the most important conversation, one-to-self. I'm your host, George Torak. My guest today is Kurian Tharakan. Here's 3 facts that I think you should know about Kurian. 1, his name, Kurian, means of the Lord. And apparently he was trying to get his wife to call him just Lord. And when he looks back on that, he realizes that maybe that was the beginning of their ending. That's when it started to fall apart. 2, second fact about him is that he grew up in a small Alberta town of 5,000 people. And 3, his favorite quote from Dr. Howard Thurman: don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive, and then go do that, because the world needs people who have come alive. Kurian, welcome to Your Intended Message.
George, thanks for having me on.
Delighted to be talking with you today. You are also the author of the book, The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell. Naturally, I'm curious what those are, because I would like to be charismatic. So for all those out there who want a little bit charisma, tell us what those 7 stories are, and then let's look at them in more detail.
Sure. Okay. So I wrote this book a couple of years ago, last year, actually, in the beginning of 2020. That's when it was released. It took 2 years to get it out the door. So the 7 stories are important, but the front half of the book is all about the culture that you have to install in your organization in order to infuse it with these 7 stories. So the stories by itself are stories, and they're great stories, but it needs a reception in the way of that cultural framework to infuse. And that way it comes alive in your organization. So if you want to know what the 7 stories are, though, there's just quickly rattle them off. The very first one is all about creation and origin. How did you start? Now, and everybody's very intrigued about what was the inciting incident that made you do this, or come to this country, or start this company, whatever it is, right? Story 2 is all about our identity, beliefs, and values. Who are we as people? What are our highest goals, aspirations? It's primarily aspirations, values, belief systems, right? What do we set as a differentiator from anybody else? What do we find in common? 3 is the big idea. What's this all about? What's the central organizing concept? For Google, it might be to organize the world's information. That's where they started anyways, right? And you got to remember, Google came into a time when it was dominated by the Yahoos of the world, Excite and Alta Vista. Well, where are those guys now? Sort of around, but a fraction of what Google is. Story 4 is all about the enemy we face. So an enemy doesn't have to be an individual. It could be a challenge. Okay, it can be something that we fight for or fight against, but it is the thing that we are trying to overcome in some way. And it might be something as simple as we're trying to overcome boredom. That could be the enemy, and that could be the enemy of every, frazzled mother on a Saturday morning with 3 7-year-olds, right? How do I get these kids, engaged into something? So that might be the enemy. Story 5 is all about the mighty winds. And the mighty winds are all about the macro trends that are buffeting the environment for you, your competitors, and your customers. And when you are on trend, everything goes your way. When you're off trend, those winds can bury you. They can capsize your ship and not, or refuse to power it at all. And story 6 is all about the journey we must undertake. So the first 5 stories is all about the left side of the equation. Okay, and if all those stories are believable, if they're believable, then it is an equal sign saying this is the journey we must therefore undertake. And so now you're going to spell out the path forward and how to get from out of this current state of affairs, whether it's pain or a lack of gain, and get to the future state of what you desire. And the final story is what we call a meta narrative. It's a meta narrative, combines all 6 stories into one telling. And it's called the Why We Will Win story. And the only difference between the 6 and the Why We Will Win stories is one telling, but then we add what we call our keystone elements. And keystone elements are all the things that give you that magical ability that will propel your mission forward. And so keystones throughout history, would be things like superior technology, superior people, superior strategy. God is with us. It could be a lot of different things. There's hundreds of keystones. But when you infuse your Why We Will Win story with a keystone, people have the confidence now to either move forward or to continue marching on. And sometimes you just have to convince people to continue marching on. Alexander the Great, near his final campaigns in India and such, he was very much struggling to keep his people moving on. But these stories, the Why We Will Win, were very much infused as he went through Afghanistan and all these different types of places. And you have to have the ability to keep people's enthusiasm and energies alive. Those are the 7 stories.
7 stories. Kurian, are you suggesting that a leader must have all 7 of those stories to lead effectively, or could they succeed with 2, 3, 4 stories?
The answer is these 7 stories are primal. They are primal. And if you want to take a look at these 7 stories where they really come alive, is in the major religions of the world. And if you take a look at the major religions, whether they're holy texts, they're sacred texts, you have the Bible, you have the Quran, right? You have these sacred texts that have all 7 stories in it. They have all 7, and they are 7 stories that are necessary to assuage the curiosity and intrigue in your adherents' minds. You need these. How did it start? Where are we going? Why are we here? And these are why these 7 stories are important. Now, here's what I don't want you to do, though. Do not do this. Do not go to a cocktail party and slam the 7 stories over anybody that comes near you. You got to tell them, a little bit of one and see what the intrigue is and follow that along and really understand what people find intriguing about it, right? The 7 stories are necessary from the sacred text point of view, the entirety of what you're about. But to start off, the very last thing you want to do is tell all 7 in one telling. You want to go to the one point of intrigue that is going to be relevant, functionally relevant and emotionally significant to that prospect. The easiest one to tell is story 5. It's about the macro trends, the mighty winds.
The mighty winds. So I imagine during the pandemic, any story that relates to the pandemic of how we as a community or an organization or a business can learn from that or leverage that or grow those kind of stories. Do I read that right?
Absolutely. So what I say is, well, that's an example of it, right? So it's a very recent example as well. But the mighty winds, I say that every organization, every business is like a sail ship, not a powerboat. It's a sail ship. And what most beginning business people do is they go out and they create the fancy ship without ever ascertaining the direction, availability, or strength of the wind. Right. And so if you know what the wind strength is and direction is, you're going to create a whole different type of ship. Some are going to be fast. Some are going to be freighters. Some are going to be whatever you need it to be, but you adapt it to the macro wind. If you are counter to the wind, your ship is either going to stay still in the water or be capsized. Right. That's just what's going to happen. When you're with the wind, the wind will rise forward all of the sails in all of the boats. And you just have to be now the best boat. but don't be counter to the wind. That's the big thing, right? So when you go and say something about the pandemic, here's a aspect of this. So the mighty winds are the following things, like societal trends, technological trends, economic, environmental, political, and legislative trends. 6 major mighty winds. So that would be an example, perhaps, of there's a demographic aspect that came out of the pandemic. There's a technological aspect that came out of the pandemic, right? With the new vaccines and such. There is definitely, things with political and legislative. We have stay-at-home orders. We have all sorts of things at play here. Now, how do you take advantage of this, though? You have to project the wind forward. And you just have to take a position that you truly believe in. And one of the things you might say is this is just the beginning. You haven't seen anything yet. Now, if you think this pandemic, okay, this whole thing with COVID-19 was the big one, that is going to be a baby step to the pandemics that are coming. But here are the technologies that are in the background that are coming up that are going to enable us to fight these before they even begin. If we don't fight them, we'll be consumed. But if we get on top of these technologies, we're going to come out ahead. Now, have I got your attention?
You did, yes. That's a short but powerful message in a story format.
Now, that's the big idea. Now, the big idea is the very first thing that you sell. And now, there are people that absolutely believe that big idea that I just said to you, right? They absolutely believe it. And now, if I can now embed that big idea into my believers, the initial adherents that come to me, okay? And we can start a movement around that now. And then we start slipping in the bigger story elements around that. Because the very first thing that you sell, the absolute very first thing, is the big idea. If people don't buy the big idea and then the resulting story from it, they won't buy anything else because it's not relevant. It's not functionally relevant. It's not emotionally significant to their lives. So this idea of the very first thing you sell, the big idea. And most organizations, movements, products, companies, whatever it is, they fail because their stories fail. That's why they fail. The story ceases to be relevant, or it's not a relevant story to begin with. They thrive when the stories thrive. Okay, and so stories are the very first thing, the big idea and the stories around those big ideas.
I suppose that Apple would be a terrific example of the big idea and the stories around those ideas. Certainly, there's still stories told about Steve Jobs, and he told stories well. And when the story on the news becomes the lineup at the Apple store for the latest.
Exactly right. So, and that's a great example, because what happens when you have a lineup like that for the latest iPad or iPhone, what you're actually seeing is Apple's adherents buying into the religion of Apple, the cult of Apple. And cult is just short for culture. That's all it is. So you're buying into the cult of Apple. There's an Apple religion. And most people, a lot of people get a little concerned when I mix religion with business, right? But your business actually has a religion, but not in the way of worshiping the boss. I hope not anyways, right? But it's a religion in the sense of what are your highest ideals, values, beliefs? How do you celebrate it? What are the sacred rituals? What are the celebrations around it? And there's a very much a religious framework to all great marketing. In fact, all great marketing takes its cues from great religions. I think, who was it? Regis McKenna, one of Apple's very first marketing consultants, way back when, 70s, 1976, 78. He came up with that line, right? All great marketing takes its cues from great religion.
Because it taps into the stories that religion tapped into?
Because religions, and there's been thousands of religions over the all the years that modern humans have been around, thousands of religions. And in order to survive, the religion to grow, like there's something like 2.1 billion Christians in the world today, 1.8 billion Muslims. I think there's only about 14 million Jews. Okay, but it's the oldest religion. It's 5,000 years old. as far as the modern ones go, right? But this idea of why religions survive is because their stories thrive. They offer promise. They offer a path. They offer salvation. They are functionally relevant and they're emotionally significant. And because these stories are so alive and resonant in their adherents' minds, that's sort of the same thing you want to create in your movements, in your businesses, in your organizations. The same kind of resonance where you are now significant to the people that follow you.
Kurian, at what point in your life, in your growth, did it dawn on you that maybe you should look a little closer at the role of stories in building and sustaining organizations?
Sure. It struck me, like I've been in the sales business a long time. Then I got in the marketing business, then sales and marketing. A lot of people confuse them, but those are completely different things, right? And what I started off with is I'm selling the product features and benefits. And that was the big revelation back in the 70s, right? I wasn't selling it in the 70s, but in the 70s, 60s, sell features, don't sell the features, sell the benefits. But ultimately, it comes into something much bigger than that. And the more you focus on the product itself, what I realized is that the product is simply a tool set. So ultimately, if we go back to this idea of this story that you're trying to understand, it's not the story of your products or your company or anything like that. It is the story of your customer as hero. And so if you take a look at every Pixar movie format, you have your hero, something happened, some kind of inciting incident. They were forced on a journey, and then they finally found Nemo. Lots of things happen in the journey along the way, right? So this idea now, the story that comes alive. So what does that make you in the story? So if you're the company and you have product and service, what does that make you in that story? Well, that makes you the wise wizard, the fairy godmother, who is going to grant the hero of that journey, the hero of that story, a magic amulet, an incantation, the indestructible sword to enable the promise of the story to come alive. And so when you understand the customer's story and you have a demonstrated empathy for that customer's story, the current situation, the desired future state, the gap in the middle, and how to now, cross that chasm with something. And that something is typically what you're saying as you involve your products and services and stories. We're going to help you cross that gap, cross that chasm with this tool set, with these magic amulets, incantations, indestructible sword. That's all your products and services are. So when you understand the story, your products and services become more relevant in the prospect's mind.
Is it fair to say, if we look at the most successful companies at any one time, there are powerful stories behind it?
Always.
So what's the Amazon story?
Well, the Amazon story ultimately comes down to this one simple thing. So there's a story when it comes down to the actual service, but then there's also the story of Jeff Bezos. Okay, and Jeff Bezos, investment banker. I think one time his highest aspiration is maybe he could get one of these what is a freight lifting little, what do you call those things? Forklift. Wow, if we could have a forklift, that would be amazing. So there's an entrepreneurial story there that is all about, how, this very young guy built this mammoth enterprise and became, probably the first or second richest man in the world now. Depends, him and Elon Musk and whoever else. But the second part of that story, the Amazon story, is much more of a practical story. And that is, and, I hate to say this, they're training me now, them and Wayfair and such. You have this breadth of selection that you won't ever find in a brick and mortar store because they can't possibly stock that inventory in every possible color, in every possible style, in every possible functional array. And so you have all of these things, and it is so easy to research everything and to pay for everything and to select everything and all that kind of stuff. There's a very functional story there that is solving a big pain in most people's heads. Now we're going the other direction now as well. And the other direction is because they are so good at training me to go online first, I really do feel the guilt of letting my local retailers down. I would much rather spend that money with my local retailers, even if I have to pay a little bit more, because I recognize that their health is my local city's health, right? And so we need to be cognizant of that. And I haven't reconciled this yet because it's, again, so easy to do it, and they are so customer centric that it's very tough for the local retailer to compete with that. But they have to find a way. Otherwise, we're going to be all in. We're all going to be slaves of Amazon. That's what's going to happen, right? And I don't want that either.
There are a lot of retailers right now that are certainly suffering, restaurants among them. Do they need better stories?
You know what? I will tell you that if you don't have a story, all you have is a product. If you don't have a story, all you have is a product. Boy, and products are commoditized. Most people don't have super highly differentiated products. They have very similar products and services. Very similar, right? So massage therapy, restaurant, hamburger. And you're competing on God knows what at that point in time other than the product. Very difficult to have the best hamburger. You can do it, but then the price point and all that kind of stuff. So now the question becomes, what's the story around that restaurant, the restaurateur, that restaurant staff, the restaurant's location? There can be a million stories that come out of that. And all those things come together in one nexus to produce that hamburger. And so, but now we have all these values embedded in all the components of how this came together. And now you have this $15 hamburger. Wow, that's amazing, because there's so much depth and context to the stories behind it. Who was the founder of the restaurant? Okay. What were the struggles that they had? How did they come up with the idea for this hamburger? Where is the source of the meat? What is the secret sauce? Story. And the more stories you have, it's sort of like Velcro. Okay. If you have only one story element, you have one hook and one loop. But when you have, a million stories, you have a million hooks and a million, loops. And now it becomes super sticky because the brain has grasped onto all of these things at the same time.
On the topic of hamburgers, I was thinking of Wendy's and storytelling, and certainly they told good stories at one time. The stories about Dave Thomas, a real person, and Wendy, his daughter, and I think they were the ones that did Where's the Meat. And those stories probably eclipse the quality of the food.
That's possible, right? No,
just a guess. So I'm wondering if you could sit down with a group of local businesses, bricks and mortar, who are facing certainly a lot of competition from companies like Amazon and suffering because of the pandemic. If you could sit down with them and give them advice on how to develop and spread their stories, what might be those 2, 3, 4 pieces of advice that you would give them?
Well, there's not one story. There's stories, multiple stories. The first story you have to at least tell in a way that can be absorbed. Okay, you're not spouting it off in front of a podium at your place, but you have to have leave your customer with this understanding that you have a deep empathy for their story. You have a deep empathy for their story. So the very first story you've got to master is the customer as hero story, and where they are today, where they want to go to. Are they in pain, or do they simply want to get to gain? Like one of the examples that I use, here's a real interesting one. You might recognize this. If I'm a matrimonial lawyer, I'm a divorce lawyer, right? And, there's 2 ways your customers might show up to you, your clients. The very first way is, George, I'm getting divorced. Or you could say, George, I'm getting divorced. And depending on, the frame of the story, right? I still go and get a divorce. The matrimonial lawyer is still going to help me get the paperwork to divorce my spouse. But the process of doing that, is it going to be a high empathy situation? Make sure that I am, properly empathized with and cuddled and, and such. Or is it also about, making sure that no good husband of mine gets smacked around a little in the process? And maybe that's part of the service as well, right? I want you to be mean to him. Now, I'm not espousing that at all, right? But there's an example of two stories with the customer as hero, but it's the same product. The next story you have to tell is your product as solution to the product or service, as solution to that customer's pain or gain. And so you have to make the product come alive, and you have to tell them why this is the indestructible sword, why this magic incantation will work. Remember, you're the wise wizard or the fairy godmother that's going to help the hero out. Now you make the product and services come alive through story. And the third story, and at a minimum, this is the third story you have to tell, is about you as provider of that tool set. So who are you as a people? Who are you as an organization? What are your values? What are your belief systems, right? And when all those three things come together, then magic happens. If they don't all come together, then you're just a commodity again, right? I'll give you an example on, you as company. So let's go to a real commoditized product, rolled steel, commodity rolled steel. How do you differentiate the brand on that? Well, after go through tensile strength and that kind of stuff, whatever it is, where it's being sourced, now it goes to the company. So you have two companies you can buy this rolled steel from. The very first company, the owner of that company likes to kick puppies on the weekend as a hobby. That's what, now I'm making that up, obviously, right? I'm obviously making that up, right? But it doesn't, to me, it doesn't matter what the price of the steel is. I'm never buying from him. There's no way I would buy from this guy. And you don't have to be as graphic as kicking puppies. It can be simply as, they always have labor strife in their plants. Their people are never happy. They're always, struggling with management to get proper pay. On the other side, you have somebody that believes in environmental concerns, and you have, fair labor practices, all that. Now those values are much more aligned with mine, as long as they have to be aligned with the people. Like if I'm a union buster, maybe I like the first guy, right? But if I'm a pro labor kind of guy, yeah, that's great. I want to buy my rolled steel from people that care about other people. So now we have that alignment, right? So all three of those things, story elements are aligned.
Now, it sounds like before a company can start creating and spreading the story, they first need to decide who they want to attract.
They absolutely need to understand the target market that they are going after. And you use the perfect word here. Brands, your brand is all about meaning. Okay, what is the meaning in your prospect and eventual client's mind? What is that meaning? The end outcome, tangible end outcome, right? And so this idea of attract is exactly right. Brands are not meant to be sold. Brands do two things. They attract and repel. So they attract your perfect client. And the more polarity you have in the meaning of the brand, it attracts your perfect client. But it also does another big favor to you. It repels your most imperfect client. So they are not gumming up your system. They're not causing you havoc. They're not people that you can't satisfy. And you got to have both these things at the same time. And the only way you can really do that is to have significant polarity in the brand meaning, right? This is who we are. This is who we're not. This is who we can help. This is who we can absolutely not do anything for. And you have to be very, upfront about that. Beginning entrepreneurs want to help everybody. And that's what sort of does them in, sooner or later, unless they get off that track.
It's curious. I noticed a billboard just recently promoting Domino's Pizza. And what I found curious was they were called, it said that Domino's Pizza, the pizza delivery specialist. Notice it didn't say
great pizza cooking specialists. It was pizza delivery. What they're good at is delivering the pizza, but not necessarily tasty, delicious pizza.
Yeah, and they've chosen, that's part of the story. So it could be, the greatest tasting pizza, right? Delivered to your door in 3 days or less. That's not going to work. And, here's a real clear example. FedEx built a booming business in overnight guaranteed delivery, right? Booming business in that. And it's, absolutely positively overnight. And it's by 10 a.m. Well, Purolator is the older company. FedEx came around in the 70s, Purolator in the early 1900s. And Purolator, I'm sorry, not Purolator, UPS. And UPS came about then, right? And UPS says, we're going to beat FedEx at their game. We're going to guarantee 9 a.m. delivery by the next day. No one cared. So they got rid of that. And, and they eventually went back to logistics synchronization. That's their big thing, right? Okay, here's the thing, though. Most people don't care about guaranteed overnight delivery. Those are two value propositions joined at the hip. What most people care about is guaranteed delivery. So Purolator has built a booming business in simply saying, we don't know when it's going to get there. It might be tomorrow. It could be next week, but it will get there. And you're going to be able to track that package all the way through and see who signed for it at the end. And, the FedEx price is, 3-4 times what the Purolator price is. But the satisfaction of the motive, do you need it overnight and guaranteed, or do you just need it guaranteed? And both of those companies now have very solid market positions.
The story needs to be one-dimensional in the promise.
The story needs to be relevant in the promise. So a lot of people need both of those dimensions, right? Guaranteed overnight. A bigger portion of the market just simply needs guaranteed. And an infinitely bigger portion of the market simply says, I'll just drop it in the mail. Hope it gets there. And it probably will. The post office probably has a 99.8% deliverability rate, right? But it's not overnight and it's not guaranteed.
Kurian, in developing your business as a sales and marketing consultant, what has been a story that's helped you build the business and land your clients?
Ultimately, the clients that I have the most fun with are the ones that don't know their story. Most people can tell me what they're selling, but they can't tell me why their customers are buying. They don't understand the motive. And the motives can be lots of things: functional motives, social motives, financial motives. It could be a lot of different motives, right? So you have to understand the motive stack and also the value proposition stack that solves those motives and embed that in the story. So the stories that I have to tell. So the big idea is, why do people buy from you? And I've had some great initial, responses. And the most common response is this: great service. And when you say words like great service, that's an umbrella term. What does service mean? Does it mean that the inventory is always in stock? Does it mean that the inventory will always be delivered reliably? Is it friendly staff? Okay, is it prompt on-time service? What is it? So you can't just say service. It's got to be what aspect of that service is most desired in that client's head that is differentiated from your competitive offerings, your competitors' offerings. And now you've got a niche that you can go after. So the vast majority of people, the vast majority of customers, clients that I have, they can tell me what they are selling, but they can't tell me why their customers are buying.
And until they know why, they can't tell the right story
whatsoever. And you have to tell your customer's story better than they know their story. And I'll tell you why that is. So vast majority of people buy a home 3 times in their life, maybe twice. They don't buy 30 times, but a great realtor might be selling 10, 15 homes this month. So they see these scenarios happen all the time: underfunded, overfunded, no insurance, roof looks like it's going to cave, but it really isn't, whatever the stories are. And so the idea that you know your story, your customer story better than they do, that is something that's incumbent on you to do. You must have that, because your customer usually doesn't know what they don't know. Okay? And when you open up that knowledge gap, you start the process of engendering trust. Okay? And when you have trust, then you can have familiarity, and then you have rapport, and then you have liking. And that's how you build a brand, first with yourself, then your products, then your company. And I'm using a realtor example. Sometimes it's the product first, then the company, then yourself, whatever way it is. But all three of those things are important. But this idea, you have to be able to understand how your value proposition solves their motive better than the customer does, right? Because you probably have seen it hundreds of times more than they have. The vast majority of your customers can't enunciate their pain in the fullest scope of that pain today, tomorrow, and what it will mean in the future.
Oh, that's curious. So customers might know that something's hurting, but they don't know how to describe it or where it hurts.
And they might not even know the future pain that's coming. So, right? So let's use the mortgage example. Go back to real estate. Wow, I qualified for a mortgage. But as a realtor, they put 5% down. What does that mean, in 10 years and 15 years, things like that? We have financial stress tests, is the loan going to be called? What about the taxes on the home, and et cetera? There's a great TV show, for example, that rebuilds homes for, poor people, right? And they rebuild the home, and the value of that home goes from this to this, right? And now it's functional and it's beautiful, and it's a great TV show. What they don't tell you is, because the value of the home went from, X to X plus 50%, so do the taxes. And now the taxes go up, and now those poor people, they were poor to begin with, they have a better home, may not be able to afford the taxes. There's an example of not knowing what you don't know.
Kurian, your book, The 7 Essential Stories Charismatic Leaders Tell, it's available on Amazon. And if people, who's that book for?
That book is for business leaders. That's who that book is for. But it could also be, for not-for-profits. It's anybody that's leading an organization. That's who it's for. And it's internal facing from a leadership perspective, but external facing as well, because you have to be leaders in your marketplace. Ultimately, you have to have a leadership seat for that internal audience or that external customer.
I believe you have a special offer for our listeners.
George, for the first 5 of your listeners, all they have to do is tell me that, email me and tell me that they heard me on your show. I'm going to send them a free Kindle copy of the book. So I'm going to send you everything for your show notes. And just email me, and first 5 get that Kindle book. Just tell me you heard it on George's show.
And your email. And well, let's tell them now, and I'll put it in the description as well.
It's Kurian, Kurian at strategypeak.com. So strategy, and then peak is in mountainpeak.com.
Kurian at strategypeak.com. First 5 people who contact and said they'd heard it here on your intended message will receive a free Kindle copy. My guest today is Kurian Tharakan. He's author of The 7 Essential Stories That Charismatic Leaders Tell. And he reminds us to tell the story of your customer as hero.
If you like what you heard, remember to like, comment, and share this podcast. Come back every week for more practical insights to help you deliver your intended message. I'm your host, George Tharakan.